All right, looks like we're kind of holding steady around 110. I'd like to welcome everybody to this follow-up presentation to our Family First Preservation Services Act webinar series brought to you by our foster care unit here at the Department of Human Services in the Division of Child and Safety and Permanency. My name is Eric, and many of you may know me, but for those who don't, I do SSIS training here at the Department of Human Services, as well as in partnership with the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy. Today, we're going to take an in-depth look at the screen associated to the Qualified Residential Treatment Program assessment. And that screen also contains information related to a qualified individual. Before we get started, I'll go over a little bit of our agenda today. We'll do some welcome and introductions. We'll blow through that real quick here because we did get started late. We're going to go through navigation, opening a new QRTP assessment in SSIS, information and fields on QRTP assessment screens, the placement screen. We'll do a quick high-level overview of what's changing on the placement screen because there will be a more in-depth webinar coming up about the AFCARS placement reasons and settings updates. We'll talk a little bit about attached files under the person, and we'll talk a little bit about QRTP assessment and referral. We're going to offer some FFPSA resource discussion and upcoming webinar information at the end. And we will try to get to as many questions and answers as possible. I do want to preface this webinar and say that with this being SSIS primarily in focus, a lot of policy questions might come up that we SSIS on the SSIS business operations and training side do not have answers ready. So we want to encourage you guys to funnel any policy related questions to that CRM email address that was offered to you in the last webinar, if you were there for that webinar. Otherwise, maybe Heidi, if you could go and find that for us and post it in the chat, not right now, but maybe toward the end as we're discussing how to funnel your questions related to both policy and SSIS.
Yep, I'd be glad to help you out.
All right, great. So with us today, we have Cynthia Shapolsky, who is our SSIS business operations supervisor. She's going to be a panelist here to hopefully maybe field some questions that I might not be able to answer for you. My name again is Eric Krad. I'm a SSIS lead trainer and the presenter for today. Then we have Anna Chalupka, who is also an SSIS trainer. We have Heidi Morris, who is the SSIS mentor coordinator. She's also a panelist. And then we have Molly Kaler and Melissa Meager here from the fiscal SME or SSIS fiscal SMEs with the business operations unit. Again, before we get started, if you do have any questions, we do have that Q&A feature down. If you hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll see some options to either post in the chat or the Q&A. You may even see an option to raise your hand. We prefer that questions be asked in our Q&A feature because when they're asked in the Q&A and the chat, it gets kind of confusing. So please try to put any questions that you might have in that Q&A. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is that QRTP assessment screen in SSIS. So you see before you on the right-hand side of your screen, we have the permanency folder in SSIS, and that is located under the participant. And again, we'll go through that here in a demonstration. But to create a new QRTP assessment, you're going to go over under the QRTP assessments folder under QRTP documentation. And again, this is located under a participant's permanency folder. Over to the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the new screen in detail. And we will go through, again, entering data in those screens. So give me 1 minute or 1 second to transition here and we'll get started once I get everything set up. And throughout today's presentation, Heidi will be throwing some links into the chat that will guide you to tutorials that we have put together for you, as well as the presentation for today. All right, panelists, if you could give me a thumbs up if you see the SSIS screen. All right. So navigating to the new QRTP assessment screen, I'm going to select my workgroup search and I'm going to locate a workgroup where I'm going to plug this information into. Again, the screen for the QRTP assessment and qualified individual subfolder is found under the participant. I'm going to open this workgroup here. And then I'm going to locate my participants. And we're going to enter the information for the QRTP assessment under this fake client that I've created by the name of Stacy Snow. So I'm going to locate the permanency folder. And I'm going to click on the caret next to that permanency folder. And I'm going to locate the QRTP documentation folder. To create a new QRTP assessment, I'm going to select QRTP documentation. And as a shortcut to create an action menu, I can simply right-click on QRTP documentation and select new QRTP assessment. You can also create the action menu as we usually talk about in training by highlighting QRTP documentation and selecting the lightning bolt or the action menu on the underneath the blank display screen. So I'm going to select new QRTP assessment. That's going to bring up our QRTP assessment screen. The screen starts with QRTP assessment and qualified individual help text. This help text is to provide information to users regarding use of this screen. The next question is, was the juvenile treatment screening team bypassed due to an emotional crisis or other mental health emergency? We're going to select yes or no radio buttons to answer this question. And as you can tell by the red indicator, this information is required for saving. For training today, we'll just say that this juvenile treatment screening team was not bypassed. And then we have the field date recommended for placement in QRTP by the screening team. So this field enables when the answer to this question up here is no. This field is enabled and requires the date that was recommended for placement by the screening team. It starts with a multi-column list. So we're going to select that. This date that populates here, June 22nd of 2021, is the date that the juvenile treatment screening team screened this particular screening. So we're going to select that date in the dropdown. Now, if the juvenile treatment screening team was bypassed due to an emotional crisis or mental health emergency, if this was yes, then this field would be disabled. The next field we have is date referred to a qualified individual. We're going to manually enter or select the correct date from the date picker for when referred to a qualified individual. Again, this information is required for save. So you can manually enter, as I said, or you can select the date from the dropdown. And then qualified individual completing the assessment, you can select from the dropdown if you see your qualified individual. However, if you don't see your qualified individual in this dropdown, you can navigate to the action menu and you can select add new collateral or add existing collateral to add a professional collateral, that is. But for training purposes today, we are going to select this individual by the name of Connie Lannister. She is going to be our qualified individual. And then this screen will default to the worker who's generating this screen. You can select from other agency staff if you are not the one who is the worker assigned to this particular placement or case. The next section of the screen is, did the parent request a specific culturally competent qualified individual? And then you're going to select yes or no radio buttons to answer this question. If you select yes to this question, the next field enables for if yes, explain the agency's efforts to refer the child to this identified qualified individual. So your efforts will be placed in this field here. If your response is no, then this field is not enabled. And again, we want to encourage agencies to look into culturally competent qualified individuals. For example, for ICWA eligible cases or MIFPA eligible cases. So you have 4,000 characters of free text that you can answer in this field here. And you will, again, describe the agency efforts to refer the child to an identified qualified individual. The next field is, was the assessment completed by a specific culturally competent qualified individual? And you can select yes or no radio buttons to answer this question. Whoops, I skipped right here. And then the date the qualified individual provided the assessment to the agency. Again, you can manually enter that date or you can select from the drop-down date picker to answer that question. The next field is regarding the QRTP placement. Now, oftentimes placements haven't even been entered, so you wouldn't see a placement listed in this field. However, in this particular training database, I've already entered the placement for this particular child. So if the screening team, if the juvenile treatment screening team was bypassed due to an emotional disturbance and the child was put into a QRTP placement and bypassed that, like I said, the juvenile treatment screening team, then that placement already may exist. And you would see that placement that qualifies for QRTP under the setting and reason, and we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. You'll see the date populate in this QRTP placement field. But again, it would be blank if the placement hasn't already been initiated in SSIS. Then we have the question, was the QRTP family and permanency team membership provided to the qualified individual? We're going to have some webinars about the family and permanency team and how to build that team. The team is going to consist of a variety of individuals, both from the agency, from the family, et cetera. So we want to encourage individuals on the family and permanency team to be included with that qualified individual assessment or a list of that family and permanency team provided to the qualified individual. So we'll select either yes or no using the yes or no radio buttons here. Then we navigate down to the bottom portion of our screen here for placement preference and recommendation. The placement preference and recommendations help text is there and available for workers to provide description and guidance of this section of the screen. So as you can see, there's a variety of fields, placement preferences of the child and youth, placement preferences of the child and youth's tribe when ICWA applies, placement preference of the QRTP family and permanency team, and the placement recommendation of the qualified individual. You'll select the choices or the preferences, I should say, the placement preferences for the child and youth, etc., by selecting the drop-down icon and selecting from one of the following. Remain in the family home. And that's obviously if the child prefers to remain in the family or in the family home. You also have placement in a family foster home with kin. You have qualified residential treatment program, setting for youth who are pregnant or parenting, setting for youth who are at risk or were sex trafficked, supervised independent living 18 to 21, or other residential facility not Title IV-E. These selections are all the same for all of these placement preference types for tribe, for QRTP family and permanency team, as well as qualified individual. The qualified individual's assessment and recommendation report can be brought into the screen, but first we have to complete the attached file to bring in that assessment and recommendation report. And I'm going to save this screen and talk a little bit about attached files, and I promise I will get to your questions here in just a little bit. So again, we want to go to the attached files folder underneath the specific participant. If you attach files under chronology, you won't be able to pull it in to this particular field on the QRTP assessment screen. So we can select attached files, and prior to this training, I completed the attached files, but basically you want to make sure that you have your drives mapped to SSIS so that you can upload the QRTP recommendation, or I'm sorry, the QI recommendation and assessment to SSIS. You simply want to right click or create an action menu from attached files and select new attached file. I just want to go over a little bit of the anatomy of the screen really quick. Once you select the assessment and recommendation from your personal drive and attach it under the participants attached files, you'll see the name of that file appear over here under file. And then you'll see file, ext file size and attachment date. And I just wanted to alert you all to this new document type that you'll find in the dropdown labeled Qualified Individuals Assessment and Recommendation Report. You'll click on the dropdown and it'll be number 44 down here toward the bottom of that dropdown list. So you'll want to select that, and then you can add any additional comments relating to this attached file, and then you would save it. Once that is saved, you can navigate back to your QRTP assessment. And there could be multiple QRTP assessments for this child. Maybe this isn't the first one. You want to locate the correct one underneath the QRTP assessments folder. Click anywhere on the screen to activate it. And then under Qualified Individuals Assessment and Recommendation Report, you can see that that attached file appears here. So you can select it and bring it into the screen. You can only select one assessment per screen. Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint here. So let me stop sharing for just a second and then I'll reshare. All right, so earlier I was talking to you about the changes on the placements, locations, and absences folder, which is underneath the continuous placement in SSIS, and some new setting and reason codes that we will be plugging into SSIS that are QRTP related. Now, the grid that you see over here on the left-hand side is for QRTP placements only. If you have been part of a few of our other webinars in our series, we have mentioned that there are specialized settings for pregnant and parenting youth, individuals who are victims of sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation or at risk, or semi-independent living services. But what you see, and they will also have their own specialized settings and reasons, which we will cover in an upcoming webinar related to AFCAR's placement changes. So I wanted to just mention those, that this grid that you see on this screen here are related to those QRTP placements only. So over here we have the setting of group home staff operated, followed by the reason of treatment for severe emotional disturbance. And then this applicable certification section of the placement screen will then change to QRTP based on this particular setting and this particular reason code. And then you just kind of follow it down the list. We also have a residential program for your setting. And then we have treatment for severe emotional disturbance for your reason. And then again, based on the setting and reason code that you enter on the placement screen, you'll get that applicable certification of QRTP. So I just kind of wanted to make mention of that. Now I'm going to switch back to SSIS and show you what my placement screen looks like. So closing, I'm going to save the changes to my screen. And then I guess I didn't have to go too far because I'm still under my permanency folder. So I'm going to locate my placements, locations, and absences folder. And then as I was trying to explain verbally for those who are visual, here is an example of a placement that is group home staff operated. And then the reason of treatment for severe emotional disturbance, and then that applicable certification changing to QRTP. Now we've made mention that, and related to the qualified individual, we have to do that referral document. And the referral document is also going to be found under the person. So not under chronology documents, but person documents. So we'll talk a little bit about loading up that particular document for the referral. So underneath the attached files folder, underneath our person, we have the documents folder. And I may or may not have already created one in my test environment, which I have, but I'm just going to walk you through setting up another one just for that visual training aspect here. I'm going to right click on documents and I'm going to select new document. I'm going to select the magnifying glass to search for the documents under person documents. And it takes a little bit to navigate there because there are quite a few documents that are in SSIS. So it's just searching and looking. Come on, SSIS, you can do it. All right. So then we find QRTP assessment referral form either in our tree view, or we can find it in our grid as well. Once we highlight it either in the tree view or in the grid, we can then navigate to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen and select. That's going to bring us to our setup tab and preview. Again, we want to work from top to bottom, left to right, whenever we're setting up any kind of service plan or documentation in SSIS. So we start at the top, and it's stating that there are 8 required fields needed to complete this particular setup tab before we can move over to the document tab. We start with a document template of QRTP assessment referral form. We have the description, which is also the same name. You can modify this field if you need to. I don't know why you would, but maybe you want to put in a date. I don't know. I would just leave it as it is, unless your agency supervisor directs you to put something else into that field. And then we have a status of draft. So we want to leave this document in draft status until we're done completing the form. As we navigate down the document portion, we want to put in the letter date. Again, we can manually enter that date or select it from our date picker. The agency information auto-populates based on the database in which we are creating this document from. So your agency will appear under agency name, and then whether or not is it a county or region. The participant information autofills based on the participant we're filling out this document for. If there's a placement entered in SSIS, as I have shown you, that information will populate in the document. However, the placement will not be there if you have not entered the placement in the placement location and absence folder yet. And then we want to answer the question, is the current placement setting a qualified residential treatment program placement? We'll say yes or no. And this field is required only if placement information is populated here. So maybe in this example, we bypassed the juvenile treatment screening team. We've placed the child in a QRTP due to a severe emotional disturbance. So we've loaded the placement in SSIS, and we have placed this child in a certified QRTP. So then we would say yes. If they weren't a certified QRTP, then the answer would be no. Then we have the Indian custodian, the legal guardian, as well as the parent section. And again, I alluded to this in the previous webinar if you were a part of that. Relationships should be entered for these particular individuals under the relationship folder in order to find them in the dropdown. So I have this particular individual's parent relationship entered. So we'll find Shannon, her mom, listed under that particular section. Then we navigate to the bottom of this referral form, and we can decide whether or not to send the language block. You're going to enter the caseworker email. You're going to enter the caseworker's full name and the phone number. Then the qualified individual email should be entered here, as well as the qualified individual's full name and phone number. And I look up here and it says no required fields left to complete. That is an indication that I can then go to my document tab and start editing that document and getting it ready to send out. I'll go through this briefly. This information is all located in that job aid that Heidi had linked in the chat. Heidi, maybe you can throw the links out there again. I know individuals may have possibly joined a little later and may not have those links. So if you do that for me, that would be awesome. Thank you. So here is our preview screen or the RTF document. If we want to make any edits to this screen, we're going to select that blue editor button up here in the top left-hand corner, right under setup. And it's going to bring us to the SSIS editor. And as usual, anything highlighted in yellow can be edited. The information from the setup tab will merge into several of the fields on this document, but you do want to kind of go line by line and make sure that all of your information is correct and all of your information is there. You do want to indicate the referral date on this form, and you do so by clicking on this here, this this month, day, year icon here. And when you do that, a select a date window will pop up, and let's just say it's today's date. Then you're going to hit that little check mark, and then that date will populate by the referral date. We also have a credentials section here. Perhaps Connie Lannister is a contracted QI, and maybe she's a licensed social worker. So we'll want to put in her credentials next to credentials. As we navigate down through the editor, we'll want to indicate if the Indian Child Welfare Act and the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act are applicable. We will want to answer yes or no to, has the child been or is at risk of becoming a victim of sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation? Was the level of care determination conducted for this child, yes or no? And then the current child's location. So that's going to pull from that placement information that was on the setup tab that was pulled from the placements, locations, and absence screen. And then you'll want to indicate the permanency plan over here on the right-hand side, whether it's reunification, placement with other relatives, adoption, establishment of a new legal guardianship, if there are permanency plans already established. And then when is this assessment due? This is also an important date to put in so that the QI can reference that. Again, you're going to select on that month, day, year, and you're going to select, you're going to manually enter the date or pull it in from a date picker by clicking this downward arrow. And we'll just throw in a date there, but it's going to have to be within 30 days of a child's placement, if the child has been placed. Okay, so that's basically the ins and outs of setting up the QRTP assessment referral. Now you can save this document to your own personal drive by selecting Save As. Otherwise, you can exit out of the editor by selecting the X. Your changes to this document should save on the template. And we also want you to save a copy in SSIS. So to do that, you would navigate to your action menu and you would select Save. All right, I'm interested in getting to your questions and answers. So again, the objective today was to cover the new additions to our permanency folder for the QRTP assessment, talk a little bit about applicable placement settings and reasons on the placements, locations, and absences, also attaching files, and creating a QRTP assessment referral. So I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to see what kinds of questions you all have. And again, check that chat out for some really important resources related to this information. So let's see here. Joanne asks, so the QI needs to be either a collateral in the work group or listed as a professional collateral. And I believe in order to pull that individual into the screen, that answer is, or that the answer is yes. So let me go back to sharing. Yep, so if I were to take this individual's name out, then we do have a field requirement here. So to answer your question, Joanne, the QI has to be entered as a collateral or a professional collateral. And again, to do that, They're either already entered as the professional collateral, or you would add them by going to the action menu and selecting add new collateral or add existing collateral. Terry asks, do you need to answer the question, was the assessment completed by a specific culturally competent, qualified individual if the other question was no? That is also a very good question. So I believe what Terry is talking about is, did the parent request a specific culturally competent? And if that question was no, then do we need to answer the question, was the assessment completed by a specific culturally competent, qualified individual? I do believe you do have to answer those questions, but let's just take a look. I don't think there is a requirement to answer those questions in SSIS.
And Eric, this is Cynthia.
Yeah.
I can just jump in and say,
Yeah.
I think that, like, to her question, it is kind of silly to, right, if there wasn't, for the first question, if there wasn't a specific culturally competent request for a culturally competent qualified individual, then to answer yes or no for that to be completed kind of is maybe not, doesn't make quite so much sense. So I would say for that, if answer it to the best of your ability for that specific situation. I mean, if you feel that you don't need to answer that, I think that's fine. I think if there was if the first question is yes, then you need to answer the second question for if it was or was not completed by. If they didn't request one, though, I don't think that, I think you should answer that, but I don't think you need to answer the second question. And I think it will let you go by without answering that second question, right, Eric?
Yep.
Yeah.
We do want to encourage individuals to bring in culturally competent individuals when necessary. All right, then we have a question. Should this screen be completed once the QI's entire process is done, or can information be entered as it happens? I believe you can enter information as it happens. The only section of the screen that requires information to be entered are these top fields. So SSIS wants to know if reporting wants to know if the juvenile treatment screening team was bypassed, the date recommended for placement in a QRTP, the date referred to qualified individual, the qualified individual completing the assessment, as well as the workers. So when you create the screen, you'll want to have all of that information in order to answer it. So my recommendation is to create the screen as soon as possible when you have all of this information. Joanne asks, do we have to pull in the QI report, or if a county has their own document filing system, can we utilize that? Cynthia, maybe you might want to answer that. I don't think there is, I know there's not a requirement to pull that information into the screen. It's just handy to have it available to reference in this section. But I do realize that certain counties have their own document management system that they would like to place documents in as well.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a requirement for that now.
Yep.
I'll just say, like, never say never as things change and program requirements change. But
Okay.
as of now, I don't think that would be a requirement, Joanne.
Okay. And then we have the age-old question, are counties required to use the SSIS referral form? It's highly recommended to build your documents in SSIS so that you can build a trail of the things that you've done. I don't have an answer as to whether or not this referral form is in eDocs as of yet. Cynthia, maybe you have more information on that.
That's a great question. I think the referral form, I guess I don't know off the top of my head if it is in eDocs. I know that there's a request to be, a request has been made for that. I'd have to look so we can update folks with that if we need to too.
Yeah, we can get back to you, Joanne. Is that all the questions everybody has out there? All right, just 1 second here before we close out. I'm going to throw out some resources for you all to take advantage of during this time of change. As I get this set up here, give me 1 second. And I believe Heidi has been throwing these in the chat during our coffee talk here. So there's a variety of areas where you can pull Family First Preservation Services Act information from. This first link talks about our County Link site. On this County Link site, it has all kinds of policy, all kinds of information from the federal government on Family First, as well as materials that have been used in webinars prior to this particular webinar series. So I would encourage individuals at the agency level, both county and tribe, to check that website out to get information in. And then we have our Family First Preservation Services Act webpage that has been set up through the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy. That's going to have links to additional resources as well as links to previously recorded FFPSA policy webinars and SSIS coffee talks. And then we wanted to give individuals who partake in these particular coffee talks as well as other policy webinars the opportunity to get credit or provide credit to the powers that be for attending these types of trainings. So the link at the bottom of this page, and I believe Heidi is going to throw that in the chat, is going to take you to a Google form where you're going to provide your name, your organizational information, and then allow you the opportunity to select the webinar that you are participating in so that you can keep a record for yourself of all of these webinars and get the credit you deserve for taking time out of your busy day to attend these. And then we have a ton of webinars that are coming up that talk about FFPSA as well as coffee talks. So Heidi has thrown this link in the chat. Today is the QRTP assessment process and qualified individual requirements. We had our policy webinar from 1 to 3. And then now we're having our SSIS coffee talk. Our next one is going to take place on August 24th, and it's going to be in regards to all of the changes of the out-of-home placement plan. So that's going to be a pretty heavy policy webinar as well as a content-heavy SSIS coffee talk because there have been some major changes to that out-of-home placement plan. And then I just want to bring everybody back on Thursday to talk about the juvenile treatment screening team screen that we had scheduled for August 12th, but due to screen difficulty, we needed to reschedule it for August 19th. You can use the August 12th link to register for the August 19th webinar on juvenile treatment screening. So we will see everybody back here on Thursday for that walkthrough. We kind of tended to some questions already. Feel free to send any questions that you might have to the SSIS help desk, and they can send them over to me to provide you any answers related to SSIS.